Hello everyone, this is Takekayo and welcome to BHC Studios. This is my first impressions thoughts on the Viltrox 85mm f1.8 for Fujifilm X mount. So let's start the video now. First things first, I actually did open this box up already, so this is not really an unboxing, but sometimes, you guys are curious about the packaging, and it kind of has that Apple-esque kind of packaging, all white, kind of a thick premium cardboardy packaging, and you do get other than all the warranty card information and such, I just put all this on the floor, you do get a little carrying pouch with it, kind of a microfiber carrying pouch, and it has actually the logo is pretty nice on this. I actually think that the font choice and the logo is nice, and you do get a kind of a wiping. Actually, this is actually from Per Gear, so I don't think you'll get this with the Viltrox. This is the company that actually sent me the Viltrox 85 to test. So thank you, Per Gear, for sending this to me. They did not pay me, but they did send it to me to review. So thanks for sending it to me to review, because I think that this is an interesting lens, and well, we'll talk about if I will recommend this lens or not. But a little hint, I do like this lens. So let's just open this up here. And reasonably well packed, and here we go, and that's it. That's all that comes in the box. So this is a lens. This is the lens hood. It's a little bit it's a little thin, but it's strong enough, right? I'm not a huge fan of lens hoods, except when you start getting to lenses that are over 50mm, you kind of, and this is a 72mm filter thread, so once you get this big, you kind of do want to, especially when you're shooting directly into the sun, you kind of do want to protect, not only if it's raining, but if it's really sunny and you're getting a lot of light coming in at odd angles, then you start getting flare. And so I do recommend shooting with it, but just for this review portion, I'm going to just take it off so you don't have to stare at it. But this is the actual size of the lens. The nice heft to it. It is 1.4 pounds, which is 636 grams. And a lot of people have been comparing this lens to Fujifilm's own 90mm f2, and there are a lot of similarities. This is very similar in focal length as well as aperture. The Fujifilm is slightly 5mm more telephoto, but this is 0.2 f-stop brighter, so it's not enough to make a big difference. I think pretty much if you are thinking about the 90, this is a good alternative. In terms of even size, this is bigger than the Fujifilm. It uses, as I mentioned before, a 72mm filter thread, where the Fuji 90 f2 uses a 62mm filter thread. But 72 is not an odd size. The 10 to 24 Fujifilm, the new 16 to 80, which I'm actually shooting this video on, also is 72, and the 50 to 140 f2.8 is also 72. I'm sure there's other lenses that use that. So if you're already in Fujifilm's ecosystem, a 72mm filter thread is not odd, but they Viltrox does make this lens in a Sony E-mount as well, and it works on their full frame, and it actually works as an 85mm lens, where if you have it on one of their crop sensor cameras, one of their 6000 series, then it's the same as the Fujifilm. It's a 1.5 times crop, so you're getting 127.5, so about 130mm equivalent field of view compared to a full frame on the X system, as well as the Sony E-mount and the cropped camera. So that's one of the reasons why this is quite large, because it is actually a full frame, which actually will give advantage to both the Sony cropped and the Fujifilm X mount, which is you're taking the sweet spot of the lens. So this lens is oversized for what you actually need it for, and that's actually a good thing when it comes to image quality. And I actually did notice that the IQ on this is quite good. I don't have a 90 f2 to compare it against, so there are a lot of other YouTubers that actually do have the 90 f2, and they did kind of a head-to-head, and it seems like in general everyone's saying that the Fujifilm is slightly sharper, and one of the issues that people found with this lens was that there is some purple fringing when you shoot wide open. I personally didn't really notice it. I even tried to force it, and I'll maybe embed some pictures, but maybe it's just my copy or it's a newer copy, but I didn't have a problem with it, mostly because I shot at night. But if you do get purple fringing, it's not a difficult thing to remove in Lightroom. You just go into the lens setting and you just get rid of the aberration. So I didn't find an issue with it. Now going through a little bit more of the specs, it's 10 elements in 7 groups. And so it's reasonably complex, and that probably adds to the bit of the heft. And it goes from f1.8 to f16. And if you notice, it does say X mount there, but this doesn't have an aperture ring, so you have to make sure that your Fujifilm camera is set up to use one of either the front or the rear dial for aperture. And so for me, my XH1, I just set for the front dial, but you can also set it up in custom settings for the rear dial if you want. And so that's the one thing you have to remember about this lens here, as well as the manual focus ring is very well dampened. It almost feels like it is an actual mechanical focusing, but it is not. But it's a well dampened and it's nice and thick. It's not even like a focus ring, it's like a focus tube or something. But when you have it in the AF and MF mode where you're in autofocus, you know, like this, if this was mechanical, this would be spinning, right, in autofocus mode, but it's not. And when you want to fine tune your focus, which with a lens like this, you probably do want to, then you can just override it. And the beauty of this lens is that it actually does have the contact point, so you can see that. So it does communicate with the body, and one of the things I like about that is that when you shoot with this lens, all the XF data is transmitted to the body, so you know that you have the 85mm Viltrox, you know what aperture you're shooting at, and all the information is shot across. And there is even a little micro USB connector there, if you can see, for firmware updates, because unlike an OEM Fujifilm lens that you can update the lenses through the body, well, Fujifilm's not going to give Viltrox access to the body's firmware to talk to this. So one way is you have to use this connection here. So if there are any further updates from once you release it to improve on autofocus or face tracking, because this does do all the face tracking, autofocus, all the focus points, all those things that you expect out of this lens, you can do it. And then whenever Fujifilm adds a new feature, well then what Viltrox would do is they'll just send you the firmware and then you just update it via this USB connection. So let's attach it on to my XH1, which is the camera that I primarily used with this lens. I actually, in fact, would recommend that this is probably the body of choice to attach it. One of the reasons is just straight physics and ergonomics. It's the most balanced on the XH1 because the XH1 is their largest X series body with a large grip, a heavier body. It has a nice feather touch shutter, and it just works really well with this body, especially because the XH1 has IBIS. The XT3 will also balance reasonably well on here, but you don't get the IBIS. And I shot this mostly at night. I didn't use this lens as probably as people would typically use an 85mm or like a 127.5. So this is a short tele lens, but you can use it as a portrait lens if you wish. I didn't use it like that. I used it as a street lens, shooting kind of compressed street photography, and I also shot at night. So I handheld this down to I think 1/12 of a second, and with the IBIS, it worked awesome, no problem. The IBIS works well with the the IBIS works well between the Viltrox lens and the XH1 body. But the beauty of this not using adapter is, again, it's communicating with the XH1. So once I shoot with this and then I put it on to, I use Lightroom or whatever app I use, I know that I've used this lens and I know the aperture and the exposure and all that information is sent across. And so what are my thoughts on this lens? Well, again, because I'm not comparing it against the 90 f2, my experience is this is a very sharp lens. Is it sharper than the 90 f2? According to a lot of the reviewers, they say no, there's a slight difference, but it's sharp enough for me. And in fact, I'm not sure if you guys know this trick, but in Lightroom, don't sharpen in Lightrooms. That's where you kind of get the wormy artifacts. Put sharpening down to 0, and then if you got your keepers, then import into Photoshop, and then use some of the other sharpening tools. Like I like using Unsharp Mask, and that's how I tend to sharpen my images when I shoot. And so you'll see the images that I've embedded. Either I did it in the beginning or throughout, or doing both. The images are sharp. The IBIS works really well. The IQ is good enough for me. I couldn't didn't find any issues with purple fringing. You might, but if you do, it's not that hard to get rid of. For size and weight, on the XH1, it balances really nice. I do have the X Pro 3 here, so let's just put this on the X Pro 3. So not that you can't shoot with the X Pro 3 and this lens, but you're not going to get IBIS. Here we go. So this is what this looks like on the X Pro 3. So you pretty much have a full frame 85-1.4 that acts like a 127.5 at f2.4 or something equivalent in terms of depth of field, how much shallow depth of field you're getting. But in terms of focal length, it's about 130. So it will work. And if you're shooting outside in daylight, you're going to get great images out of this lens. But I didn't shoot this lens on the X Pro 3, but I really think the XH1 is the body to use this with. If you already own a 90 f2, there probably isn't a need to go with the Viltrox, but the Viltrox 85-1.8 is half the price of Fujifilm's. So my thoughts on this lens is that if you already own a 90 f2, I don't think there's a need to have the 85-1.8 unless you just have a lot of money, you just want to have another version. But if you are considering between the 90 f2 and 85-1.4, I mean, sorry, though, if I've been saying 1.4, I apologize. The 85-1.8, they're so similar in focal length and aperture. In terms of performance, yes, obviously, because of the OEM status of the 90 f2, it is fully WR. This, I think the front section here is WR, but they don't rate it WR, but I don't see anywhere where water can actually leak in other than maybe the sealing around the mount here. But I shot in the rain, I had no problems with it. And then I would recommend to put the lens hood on, especially when it's raining, because you don't want any water on the front element because it just kind of gets in the way. But in terms of performance, this has one low dispersion glass. The 90 f2 has 3. The Fujifilm has the EBC coating. They have their own coating on this lens. In terms of minimum focus, this has 80 centimeters or 2.62 feet. So for a lens of this focal length, it's decent enough. If you want to get macro-like, then you get the Fujifilm XF 80 f2.8. But the 90 f2, I think, is only about 60 centimeters. So it's not a huge difference. You're not using this for macro. You're using this for portraiture, for short tele, as well as maybe the kind of stuff that I was doing, kind of street work with that. So I think this is a great buy. Thank you Per Gear as well as Viltrox for having me to review this lens. I'll put all the links and such down below if you are interested in purchasing this lens. And so that is pretty much it. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we will talk to you soon. Happy shooting. Oh, and people are always asking about the strap. So this is a Barton 1972 braided military strap in muddy green, and this one here is another Barton 1972 strap. This is called the Whip, and it's a mixture of like a dark brown with black, and I think this is actually a limited run. I don't think it exists anymore. So that no one's asking me in the comments, what strap is that? All right, so this is, I like this strap because it's kind of longer and it works well with heavier bodies and lenses. And so again, that's it. I will stop talking now, and we will talk to you soon. Happy shooting.